Welcome back to another episode of The Sweet Spot. This is John Sherman from the Four Foundations of Golf. And as always, I'm joined by.
Adam from Adamian Golf.
So today we have a repeat guest on the show, but it's been a while. It's been a while since we've had Dr. Sasho MacKenzie on the show. Sasho, welcome back to The Sweet Spot.
Thanks. It's sweet to be here.
So sweet, right? So Sasho, I always have a hard time describing you. I think you're one of the most cited researchers in golf. He's a professor of biomechanics at um, I always forget what's the pronunciation of the St. Francis
St. Francis Xavier University.
Yeah. I see SFX and I was like, that's too short. I know that's a longer one. He is the co-founder of the I am
Stack.
totally like, we'll edit that out. He's the co-founder of the Stack, Ping ambassador. He's like so many things I can't even keep track. Anyway, Sasha, welcome back to the show. We're going to talk about ground reaction forces. Adam has a bunch of questions. Maybe we'll get into some ball rollback stuff if we're here for 5 hours. But we can go a lot of different directions with you.
Let's go in as many as we can.
Okay. All right. Let's start off with ground reaction forces, because I think this is a topic that comes up a lot. People hear about it. I don't fully understand it, to be quite honest with you, and I'm sure a lot of listeners of the show are kind of have a layman understanding of it, like myself. So what are ground reaction forces in the golf swing, and why should a golfer care about them? Like, give us the basic explanation.
Yeah, okay, let me give you an overview. So if we were to define a ground reaction force, we contract our muscles. Like, let's say, we're standing there in address position, hitting a golf shot. If we contracted our quad muscle, that would want to extend our knee joint, which would push our foot down, but the ground gets in the way. So that muscle contraction results in a push into the ground, and then the ground reacts to that ground reaction force and pushes back up on us. It definitely pushes on us, definitely moves us around. They're very important in the golf swing, but without our muscles, there wouldn't really be any ground reaction forces. So that's the definition. And then you go, okay, from a very high level, what role could they play in the golf swing? Well, I like to do thought experiments. What if there wasn't the ground? Right? What if we were in outer space? Best guess, if your driver's club head speed right now is 100 miles an hour on the ground, when it play around a golf, you'd probably generate 60 miles per hour of club head speed if you were in space and trained for a bit and got coordinated trying to do it. Well, you can't play effective golf at 60% of your max club head speed unless you're someone like Martin Borgmeier. So we need to use the ground to generate club head speed. And also it helps us orient our body so we can effectively use the club and orient the club the way we want. It's not the end all and be all, but it's really important. That 40% is pretty critical. Yeah. So that's high level overview. I could rant all day, but maybe if you jab me with specific questions and direct me.
So if you're in space and you're trying to swing that club as fast as possible, your hands are going forwards. I'm on a swivel chair right now, and even if I just pick my feet up and do that, my hands go forwards, but my hips actually go the reverse direction. So I'm sure some ground reaction forces are used in terms of stabilizing the pelvis, or I mean, you would use better terminology than I.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't like words like stabilize in the golf swing, but what I would use is the term angular momentum. So when we're in space, we have no angular momentum in our system. Think of it as rotational speed. It's the rotational speed times moment of inertia. We probably don't need to get into that, but basically it's just rotational speed. We have no angular momentum, and the way angular momentum works is that if we generate downswing angular momentum in the club, let's call it counterclockwise, and we need 10 of that to generate 60 miles per hour club head speed, then other parts of my body will be going in the opposite direction if I'm in outer space. So I get 10, units of counterclockwise angular momentum in the club, then my body's going counterclockwise or the other way with negative 10, because the total has to stay at zero. That's the big limiting factor when you're in outer space. So the ground enables us to change our angular momentum, get it something more than zero. And then the idea is to get as much of that angular momentum as we can out to the club. And that's where that additional 40% of our club head speed comes from. It's our ability to use the ground to change our angular momentum and then get that out to the club. And it's helpful to take, a broader context, take a step back and look at sports. The driver is a unique element in that we can generate some clubhead speed if we're not attached to the ground, not in contact with the ground. If we look at a badminton racket, it doesn't really matter. The fastest smashes, the fastest clubhead speed, racket speeds tend to be generated when someone's in the air without any angular momentum. The badminton racket, 100 grams, low moment of inertia, very light. Just our own inertia is enough to resist ourselves from rotating away from the direction the badminton racket's going. So whether I'm on the ground or in the air with the badminton racket, it doesn't matter. The driver, most golf clubs have enough oomph to them where they push back on us, and if we don't have angular momentum in the system, we're going to struggle to maximize clubhead speed and orient ourselves the way we want.
So what would you classify as someone who's like using the ground effectively and then a golfer who's like using the ground what you would say poorly? Like what's going on throughout their golf swing that would make it more efficient or worse? Like for example, like I had a friend the other day, he's like, man, do you have any good drills for like swaying? I'm getting stuck on my back foot, I can't get, like the common thing that golfers say. Like is that part of it? Like I know there's pressure shift, center of mass, and all that stuff that I don't quite understand, but what's good and what's bad?
Yeah. Okay, let's say we're talking about clubhead speed to keep it simple for a second. This is the direction the whole golf industry needs to move in. Anybody with a force plate, anybody that's talking about ground reaction forces and clubhead speed, really, hopefully in 5 years, everybody has this philosophy. Okay, bear with me for a couple of minutes here and hopefully you guys can keep me in the rails, but this is super important, I believe. Okay?
Take off.
Okay, so what we're missing is an understanding of how much angular momentum you need in the system for a given clubhead speed. Okay, so let's imagine that we get 100 golfers, okay, and we can measure how much angular momentum they're generating in the system from using the ground. Okay, and it's a total amount in the downswing and impact. I'm like, oh, John's got 40, Adam's got 45, Sasho's got 32, and then we look at clubhead speeds, right? And you kind of plot them. And what you'll see is that there's kind of a point where you have diminishing returns in terms of clubhead speed for the amount of angular momentum that you generate. And in fact, it's possible to have too much. It's possible to have so much angular momentum in the system that you can't effectively, it hinders your ability to get it out to the club. Okay, so before you can say, hey, you need to improve your ground reaction forces to increase clubhead speed, if you can't tell the person how much angular momentum they have in their system, then I don't know how you're answering that question, right? If maybe they have too much, maybe they don't have enough, but do you kind of understand how I'm phrasing this?
So would an example of that be maybe a lady golfer who flings her hips open, or a junior golfer really flings the hips open early and they've got too much angular momentum and then they don't have the strength maybe in the core to get it out? Or is there more physics-based reason for that?
Strength or time, right? So if you continue to try and use the ground to add angular momentum into the system, then that can inhibit your ability to get it out to the club. I like to use an analogy with a car. Okay, so let's say I know you guys were just arguing before we went live, and you guys are doing a pretty good job of containing your anger, which is great. But John, let's say you and I are driving down the road.
There is no anger. Come on.
Let's say, John, you and I are driving down the road. I'm driving the car, you're in the passenger side, and Adam's kind of walking on the street away from us. And you're like, you know what? I've had it. This is my opportunity. Just cruise on over to the curb and I'm going to whack him with the door on the way by. Okay. And so imagine I'm like, yeah, all right, whatever. So I'm going like 30 miles an hour and we drive over and you unlatch the door and you get ready to whack Adam in the back. And just we get about 10 feet away from him and I'm like, yeah, Adam. And I hammer on the accelerator. Well, what's going to happen? I'm trying to help you. I'm adding angular momentum into the system, in this case, linear momentum, but it's the same concept. I'm adding speed into the system, but by doing that, I'm creating a system of forces at the door that actually causes the door to slam shut, right? So it's actually hindering your ability to get that speed out of the car and into the door. Whereas if I was just coasting along, kept the car at 30, it would be effectively the same as you, as if we were sitting motionless. You'd be able to swing the door open, hit him. And in fact, maybe if I even tap the brakes a little bit, I would help you get the speed out of the car and into the door, if that makes sense.
It does. I'm trying to think about how it relates to the golf swing, right?
Right. So if we look at people who I think are very, I hate the word efficient in the golf swing, but people who have a low angular momentum to clubhead speed, it would be someone like Phil Mickelson or Louis Oosthuizen, Fred Couples, right? The ones that look like they're Jake Knapp, ones that you're like, where is
Yeah.
this?
Where's the effort?
Where's the effort, right? And then pretty much all long drive guys always have more than enough. They always have excess just in case, right? They can time it correctly. They want to be able to access that and get it out of the system into the club. And then there are, folks like a lot of baseball players that I'll see where they tend to have too much. They pour it on continuously, and they're like me trying to help you hit Adam with the door, and they continue to try and add angular momentum in, and they just never get it out to the club, and but you before you would say, right, if you're looking at someone like let's say Matt Wolf, right, just because he's a guy who's has excess in the system in my mind, you wouldn't be like, all right, Matt, you're at 122 clubhead speed, let's make sure we're improving our ground reaction forces. Well, he's already probably got, if you looked at, hey, all the people swinging at 124, he's at the upper end of the distribution for how much angular momentum he has in the system. So it's like, well, giving him more is not going to help him get it out to the club. He needs to work on getting that speed that's already in his system out to the club. Someone like Phil Mickelson, Louis Oosthuizen, they're probably right on the edge where it's like, wow, you only have 30 units of angular momentum in the system and you're swinging at 120? Holy smokes. That's pretty good. We need to, if maybe we can tap into that if we help you use the ground more effectively.
So what would it look like though? Like, is it where they're pushing down on their feet throughout the swing? Like, I'm trying to, angular momentum to me is a, kind of a, I'm just trying to think of how it relates to, like, if you measured them on the pressure plates, like what would you see the difference between like Matt Wolf and Oosthuizen?
Right. And this is where it's very difficult to get to look at the way pressure force plates are currently being used. We are looking at peaks. Most people are looking at peaks or timing or things to me that are just like not really particularly relevant,
Okay.
Like I've got a force plate behind me, and most people have figured this out with jumping. Okay, so if you're trying to jump, let's simplify it a little bit, and so we can understand, because where you're going with the question is the correct way to go, but we need to have a little bit better foundation. Okay,
Yep. Go for it.
so if we're looking at Adam and I, and we're seeing, okay, who's going to jump higher, we need to push into the ground for as long as we can and with as much force as we can. So those two things determine how much our linear momentum is going to change in the vertical direction, and the more linear momentum we generate in the system, the higher we jump. A force times the time is something called impulse. Okay, it's the area under the force time curve. I'm pushing into the ground pushes back on me, and we've got this curve. The more area underneath it, the higher I jump. I can push harder or I can push longer. That means I get more impulse. Now, if you said, right, but let's go with who's got the higher peak. Well, I could go over there and slam my foot into the ground and generate a force that's 10 times my body weight, and I'm not even going to jump an inch, right? So, but if I apply something that's 2 times my body weight and I apply it for 0.3 seconds, well, now all of a sudden I jump really, really high. So you should be using force plates to look at what's called the angular impulse. So that's the torque that's being applied to the system multiplied by the time it acts. That allows you to calculate the angular momentum. If you just look at the order of certain forces, or you look at the peaks of certain forces, you're missing the understanding of how the whole system works.
So the area end of the curve is more important than just the peak height.
Right. The other thing that's super, so that's, even if we were trying to maximize it, that's what you do. But it's even maybe arguably less important than that. We don't want to maximize our angular momentum in the golf swing. We just need enough, right? It's so we don't want to maximize force. We don't want to maximize torque. We don't want to maximize moment arm. We just need enough to maximize club head speed, right? We're not figure skaters trying to do a quad. Do you know what I mean? We also only have a very small amount of time to use the ground to change the angular momentum of the system and still have enough time to get it out to the club. So downswing, a really long downswing might be like 0.3 seconds, right? So that means that I've probably got, you know, 0.1, maybe 0.15 seconds to use the ground to change my angular momentum. And then the rest of the time, I probably should be focused on getting it out to the club. If I continue to focus on putting it into the system, then I'm probably going to struggle getting it out to the club. Great, I'm moving super fast. That's not helpful. I want the club moving fast.
So what the most, I'm thinking of opposite ends of the extreme and trying to make it visual for people. Um, would one end of the extreme be someone who is moving everything absolutely together? That would be high angular momentum and not getting out to the club. And then the opposite would be more of like flinging everything at the bottom while the body's not moving.
Yes, if the body's not moving, you've like a Phil Mickelson, someone who looks like a, you know, a stall flipper. The body is very square at impact. The arms are completely stretched out, hip square, upper body square. In fact, even if you were a little closed, you would be you know, someone who would be maximizing the amount of angular momentum that they're getting into the club from the system. Yeah, and then you've got players who would be, you know, super open, lots of speed in the body. They're not doing a good job of getting it out to the club. You know, if you look at, I'm blanking, who was the player in the young kid in the Masters who was really having trouble hitting massive block fades?
Dunlap. Jake
Dunlap.
Dunlap.
Yeah. So there's someone who was perfectly, you know, trapped in that car analogy where he'd get near impact and instead of getting it out to the club, he'd hit the accelerator and none of that, ton of speed in the body, nothing in the club head. Not super effective.
But that could work almost like a Dustin Johnson-esque if you've got a super closed face, right?
Jim Furyk. Jim
Yeah.
Furyk was someone who, you know, but also probably was one of the reasons why he didn't have a high club head speed, you know? Yeah.
So then how does a golfer, I guess, the next natural question is like people listening is like, well, how do I use the ground more effectively and do this properly? So like when I've trained for speed, for example, I've used the stack and like tried to be explosive. I might have mentioned this on our last episode was probably a few years ago, but I needed to change my golf shoes because my lead foot was like spinning out and I was pressing harder on the ground because I was kind of self-organizing and I needed to change my shoes. So like it's one of those things where like, you know, I guess maybe it's an instruction question. Like, what do you say to the golfer versus like, what are they actually doing? It's like one of those things where it's like, how do you use the ground more effectively, but then communicate to that golfer, like, okay, I want you to feel this. Like, is it more pressure on your lead side? Like, how does it translate to intention is my main question.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of golf. I'll say this at the start. There's a lot of golfers that don't even need to think about what they're doing with the ground. I believe, you know, Tiger was famous for saying, and not that you can maybe trust, as I've learned over the years, sometimes he might not be forthcoming with the information he
Yeah,
provides,
yeah.
but he said that, you know, I never feel anything with my lower body. I'm just in tune with upper body. But I do believe that is true. I certainly know golfers who are like, what? I'm not even pushing on the ground, you know, I'm not using the ground. Meanwhile, you can see they're doing a whole lot of stuff. So you can, like, if you look at high jump, where interacting with the ground is massively important, right? A lot of times you're just talking about what they're doing with their body. We're not talking about like, okay, push this way in the ground, push that way in the ground. They're like, all right, I want you to do this stuff with your body and we'll get really high ground reaction forces. Triple jump, same thing. Triple jump, world record triple jumpers are like 20 times their body weight. You know, golf swing, we're like 2, right? So you want to talk about, okay, needing to maximize use of the ground. That's triple jump. That's it. The person who uses the ground better jumps further, but they're not necessarily focused on pushing and pulling or positioning their body necessarily relative to the ground. It's what they're doing with their body. So there's probably a whole subset of golfers that I would use feedback for how they're moving their body and things they need to do with their limbs and not even mention the ground. But there are people who need to have thoughts, or their golf swing is enhanced by thinking about how they interact with the ground. There's truth to that as well. So give me a specific issue or something that a player would have before I just, go random.
Well, here's one that comes up in my head. Maybe this is an example of horizontal forces. So that example of like my friend who texted me with like, oh, the swaying thing. And like one cue for my iron swing at times is actually to keep my weight and pressure on my lead foot. I think that helps me coil more and stop swaying and maybe hit down on it more a bit. That's been a helpful intention for me over the years when I feel like I'm getting away from good iron play and like good ground contact. Yeah, there's again that's what I'm always interested in golf is like intentions and then things because you might tell something that has nothing to do with the ground or what they're feeling in their legs, but actually impacts their ground reaction forces positively, as you said earlier. So yeah, the swaying thing
Yeah,
comes up a lot.
sorry, I thought I muted my phone. Sorry, guys. And now it's
No worries.
cutting into my, don't edit this out. No, I'm just kidding. And now my,
You got Bluetooth duality there.
yeah, but I had do not disturb on, sorry. Yeah, so I think, as an example, I like the concept of having someone feel like they're pulling me out of a pool. And so I will take someone into the impact position, move the driver just beyond impact. Okay, so past where the ball will be. It's a little past where they'd be applying this force, but it feels right. It's how you should feel it in the golf swing. And I grab onto the driver head and I lean back and I go, okay, how would you pull me out of the pool? And a lot of people will do it by like just pulling their upper arm or upper body and they kind of just lock out their leg. I'm like, no, that's not how you do it. I'm going to stay in the pool, and then I'll probably tug on the club a little harder and pull them forward. You need to feel like you are extending the lead knee, and then that's going to go into the hip, and then you have to extend the hip, and then that whole thought is to have those joints driving the lead shoulder back, right? Without trying to flex the elbow, right? You want to feel like that force from the ground is going simultaneously through the body and into the grip, right? Where there's no real delay. It's like, yeah, I'm pulling back to pull me out of the pool is that force from the ground is going directly into the club. So, that's an example of how, you might give feedback for someone to use their lead side a little bit better. If you had to pick a side, certainly the lead side's the one to focus on. I think there's lots of lead foot only golfers that seem to do better than trail foot only golfers. It's possible to hit off just your trail foot, but
it seems harder like when you think about it.
Yeah, and the technical reason for that is it's helpful to generate speed in the downswing to have the ground reaction force vector pass in front of our center of mass, so pass on the target side of the center of mass. So the place where we're pushing from, if it's our lead foot, it's already on the target side of our center of mass, so it's easier to have that force pass on that side of the center of mass. That creates wise angular momentum in the downswing. That's what we need to get out to the club. If you are pushing hard off the back foot, that's going to tend to shift that ground reaction force vector so that it passes on the back side of the center of mass. That's not helpful. That's good if you're trying to make a backswing, not great if you're trying to make a downswing. With iron play in particular, John, if you're not really trying to maximize the amount of angular momentum in the system, you just need a little bit. So it's not the end of the world to stay on the lead side, and you still probably you're still generating sufficient angular momentum in the system to get the club head speed you want. If you only need 92 miles an hour with a 7-iron, no problem. You don't need to swing it at 115 miles an hour.
So when it comes to you're an expert in maximizing club head speed, are the vertical forces because for maximizing club head speed, we've had Mike Carroll on, like, and I know you've talked about like the jumping exercises, obviously what you're doing with the stack. When you're trying to maximize club head speed, what changes? Is that pushing against the ground, that vertical force more important?
It would depend on the player, but probably I think most people, it would be what I would call the anterior posterior force is what most people are lacking. It's natural for us, somewhat natural for us to jump, and we walk upstairs. The lead leg action is like running backwards, right? So it's not a natural thing for us to. We want that lead foot. We actually want to be trying to push it towards the target line to drive the lead hip backwards. That's going to help create rotation in the swing. That is not a natural thing to do. And what is natural, the other thing that can help contribute to that rotation is pulling the trail foot back. And that is more natural. And that's, I believe, one of the reasons why we see a lot of early extension. So we're like, all right, I'm going to try to rotate here, and I'm used to pulling my trail foot back. That's how I walk. That's how I run. So, okay, if I'm going to create some rotation, let's pull that trail foot back on the ground. That's going to create some rotation. But if I don't match it with an equal force from my front foot pushing me back, then I start to move towards the golf ball. And that's one thing you will never see an elite player do, is lose their balance forward. But I see it all the time with amateurs. That trail foot, in an effort to create rotation, horizontal plane rotation, that trail foot pulls back. So that's going to help rotate us in the downswing direction. But it's not matched with an equal and opposite force from the front foot. So because there's an imbalance in the forces, that force is going to move the center of mass towards the golf ball, and you see amateurs all the time take a step forward. Scotty is an amazing example of the opposite of that. He is
Falling
always
backwards.
flying away from the ball. There's a great montage of Tiger Woods. Someone just posted it. You two have probably seen it, Golf Junkies, where it's like him hitting drives on repeat. It's like 1996, 1997, 1998, and it goes through all the years. You can probably find it on YouTube. And if you watch his front foot, you could always slide a golf magazine under his front foot through impact. He's always getting some airtime. These are just random drives. It's not like someone cherry picked him for this reason. And it always steps out and to the left, right? So he's always a little more active with the front foot than the trail foot. The center mass is always moving away from the target line, never falling towards the target line. It's just not something that tour players do. It's just you have developed sufficient angular momentum where if you need a little bit more, you're able to get it out to the club, no problem.
Now, in terms of getting out to the club, you going back to your John running me over analogy, I suppose I can think of two different ways of getting that car door to slam into the back of me. You could push on the car door more, as John is keeping a stable speed, or you could slam or tap the brakes on the car, and then the car door slams forward more. What are the ways of doing that in golf? Getting this body rotation, angular momentum out into the arms and into the club head.
Yeah, well, an extreme example would be you could stop the torso. I don't believe that I wouldn't suggest that, but that's an extreme example. If you're rotating the torso and downswing and you turn on the backswing muscles, stop torso rotation, arms and club are going to sling on past. I think that might be an effective strategy in long drive where we're absolutely trying to maximize everything, so that gives you a little bit more time to get angular momentum in the system because you're going to get it out fast. Right. But I don't think, if we're not trying to swing at 160 miles an hour, we only need to swing at 120. It's probably not the most effective way to, keep the ball in the fairway,
Not. I'm interested in that part.
Yeah, well, I would say because it requires a higher level of coordination in the neuromuscular system. So I need to quickly turn on and off muscles, which elite athletes can do, and that's what makes a lot of elite athletes, especially sprinters. It's not just that they can quickly turn on their muscles to run fast. You need to go through cycles of turn on, turn off, and turning off muscles is probably more challenging and more of a differentiating factor with elite athletes than turning them on. So if it was just, hey, jump as high as you can, yeah, there's lots of people that can do that and probably jump higher than Usain Bolt. But can you immediately go from jump as high as you can to now pull yourself down to the ground as fast as you can? That becomes challenging. So if I'm making a downswing and I get to, turn on my internal, external obliques that rotate my trunk in the downswing direction, and then I just need to, ramp them up and then kind of let them shut off, or just, but I don't need to activate the backswing muscles, then that requires less coordination. I just then say, all right, let's start going with the arms in the downswing direction. And because my arms are now engaging in the downswing direction, that's going to slow my torso down. And now let's start using the trail tricep to push across the shaft, use some wrist muscles, that's going to slow the arms down. But if I try to stop everything, that adds a layer of coordination, turning on and off.
So I'm thinking of an analogy there of darts. So it's almost easier to have a reasonably stable acceleration than to stop abruptly and try and time that stopping. Is that a reasonable analogy there?
That's a reasonable analogy. And I'll say that yeah, and you see the elite dart players don't do that. It's interesting if you look at, then I pick another analogy, frisbee, where it becomes a fundamental in generating high speed. I don't play frisbee very much, but when I do go out and do it and I toss it around for an hour, the muscle that's sore is not my tricep, which is doing the extending. You would think that, hey, that's the one that's active. It's the bicep from eccentrically stopping the forearm so that speed can get out to the frisbee. Next time you throw the frisbee, it's going to be in here is where you're going to be sore. I don't think that's fundamental to having the disc fly. I don't think we need to do that in the golf swing. If we're trying to maximize club head speed, like a long driver, it might be something they want to tinker with. I don't think it's super effective for someone who's also trying to just get enough speed and find fairways. I think we don't need that extra stress on the coordination.
So in golf, it's almost a case of, rather than trying to stop or slow down a segment, you're trying to speed up another segment. Is that?
That would be my philosophy. Yeah.
That's what I've
Yep.
tended to do in the past. Yeah, but it's
Yep.
yeah, it's interesting information on the whole stopping thing and how that could potentially increase distance.
Yeah. Potentially. But if I was 85 and had 65 miles an hour club head speed, never missed a fairway, then be like, yeah, this might be something I would tap into. But it doesn't seem like there's a lot of the best golfers doing this. Phil would be someone on the close end of that, who looks like he's maybe, especially with his recoil. But I would put Phil in the above average category for coordination. To me, I look at it like, if you've got 30 feet of green to work with and, it's slightly uphill and nice clean lie, you could putt it, you could do whatever you want. You're probably not playing a flop shot, right? Phil could, who cares, right? But it requires, some extreme coordination to pull that off.
You couldn't tell who's really doing this just by looking at the movements of the body. Am I right in saying so? So, someone like McIlroy used to reverse his hips. Now, some people would look at that and say, oh, he's actively trying to reverse his hips. But what's probably happening is the upper segments, the upper body, the arms, the club is speeding up and causing that reversal. You almost couldn't tell just by looking at the motion which method they're doing, right? Is he actively trying to reverse the hips, or is he actively trying to speed up the more distal segments?
Yeah, with McIlroy, I think that was him not completely inconsequential, I believe. So the muscles, if he was reversing the hips, that would be coming primarily from interacting with the ground. So the femurs on the bottom of the pelvis would be causing that. I don't think he was doing that. What was happening was he just didn't care to continue to use the ground to keep the pelvis rotating forward. And so when the torso on top of it, when those muscles contracted to rotate the torso in the downswing direction, equal and opposite forces caused the pelvis to go, backwards a little bit. But, it had I don't think it had any consequence on anything. But cosmetically, he was then say, okay, well, maybe I don't like the pelvis going backwards. Well, then I'll just keep using the ground at the bottom of the pelvis to provide a torque that matches and actually exceeds what the torso is doing to rotate it backwards. So the pelvis keeps kind of going forward, but somewhat inconsequential in my opinion.
Adam, I know you had a bunch of other questions for Sasho. I don't want to make the whole episode about the grounds.
Yeah, I'm just
interested. Delve into those if you want, or you can keep going on there. Up to you.
Yeah, I'm interested in what Sasho's been interested in recently. Like, where's your work taking you? Where have your thoughts taken you? What thought experiments you're doing? What research are you doing at the moment? By that big puff out, I assume it's very fast and all different directions.
Yeah, man, I got all sorts of stuff going on. I don't even know where to. I got so many random thoughts, Adam. I don't know. You better direct
What's top
me.
of mind?
Let me guide them a little bit. What about face directional consistency? What are you learning about that? Why? One of my biggest questions is, why is an amateur less consistent than a pro? What factors go into that?
Yeah, I mean, genetics is where there are probably some things with mechanics that maybe facilitate repeatability of, face to path variability if you're trying to hit the same shot over and over again. But man, there's not much evidence, to lean one way or the other. I think Scotty Scheffler. I love Scotty Scheffler's swing and what he's doing. Because it says this guy's got the most repeatable face to path variability on planet Earth, and he's doing all sorts of weird stuff. But he probably practices really well, and he's got a high level of ability. Could you look at something in his mechanics that make him supremely more repeatable, and that's something that other people should copy? I don't really think so.
I'm interested. I'm interested that you said that because I think I saw something on Twitter the other day. I don't like responding and starting big debates, but it was kind of like one of those work hard and everything will fall into place thing. And I feel like we've almost gone the opposite direction from like genetics and your upper ability in certain things. And the more I see like the pros and the very special people you come across, I'm like, they don't fully understand why they can do this. I don't think the 10,000 hour thing has kind of gone out the window. I've probably put in 10,000 hours and knowing what you know about the body now, like, do you think there's just like this unquantifiable thing that someone is born with, obviously paired with very hard work? Of course, they're all working hard, but why can Scotty Scheffler, control the club face so well, moving his body like that? He's got something in him that we can't fully explain, right?
Yeah. I like, the only evidence I have is the cases where, and I've been lucky enough to work with a few tour players who have lost their swings, no control of the face, and I feel like it's very anecdotal. It's not like a large scale study where I can go, okay, you 20 tour players go over
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
and then I'll take these other 20 that have lost their swing. So it could be, who knows if I'm having any influence, or if my thoughts, oh yeah, great, I figured this out, and I'm like, but I haven't. It's just complete random luck. But I do feel like getting the center of mass below the net force vector early in the downswing, so that there's this mechanism to facilitate face squaring, is very helpful. And I've certainly identified this in some players that have trouble when they're playing their best. And I've done it in 3 occasions now where the players have gone and been measured. And I'm able to identify, just looking at the data, the swings that felt terrible and the swings that they said, oh yeah, that felt pretty good. So that's about the only thing, but then you've got, it's a very rare thing for a tour player not to do this. And when they get off tracks, it really goes off tracks. What it doesn't explain is the 30 tour players that all do it. And, Scotty Scheffler would be one of them. Well, why is he infinitely, more accurate face to path variability than the other ones when they all do this particular thing with getting the center mass below the force vector? But it's definitely a separator for, golfers that are good and golfers that are bad.
Now, one thing I've noticed, and this is super anecdotal, and an early release is a very, very common thing with high-handed. I can almost look at where someone's club lines up with their lead forearm and gauge their handicap from that. And so I usually use a later release when I'm changing it with people as a method of moving ground contact forwards.
I like that.
Noticed anecdotally is, and this is true in my own game as well, is I see the face to path or face direction variability reduce as well. Usually get a little better, especially once more practice. Like I've seen myself go from like 1.5 degree standard deviation to 1 degree, which is pretty significant at my level. And it feels more controllable as well. Is there anything to that? Because I know you've done work on shaft lean and
I have a 3D forward dynamics model of a golfer. It's got all the same degrees of freedom from the shoulder down to the hands that we have. And it's got, a little pelvis and a torso, it can side bend. And it's got, I don't know, whatever, 20 muscles or something, right? And so what I can do is I can say, right, let's optimize this. I did this with 7-irons. Let's optimize your coordination of your muscles to produce a really good 7-iron swing. And what I do is I have the objective function, which is what you're trying to do. And I can have penalties for things like, all right, if the face is more than 1 degree open or close to the path, then let's add a penalty that slows down club head speed, like in this objective function. So it's basically looking for, okay, when do I turn on muscles? How much should the muscle be on? Let's, you got this like thing that initially looks like an octopus falling out of a tree. And then after, millions of swings and this genetic algorithm that I wrote, you get something that starts to look like a golf swing. And then you optimize it a few times, you end up with the exact same swing. You're like, all right, we've got a good swing. But I can force it to have a certain style of swing. So I said, all right, we have to have a ton of shaft lean at impact. Okay, so I optimized one swing to have this, kind of John Rahm looking style 7-iron impact. And the robot or the mathematical model, the forward dynamic simulation will do that swing every time. So I get the exact same ball flight. Then I can take the same mathematical model, but now I'm going to re-optimize and force it to be a flipper, right? So it's actually got like, a flipper that's like negative shaft lean, like where it's actually like added loft. But I can create the impact conditions that would generate a functional ball flight. If you have a 94 mile an hour 7-iron, even if you're in a flip position, you can still hit a
Still hit
decent,
it pretty far.
you can still hit it pretty far, right? It's going to work out. So, hey, if it's just one shot, both of these models, hey, great, they go in the PGA Tour, right? But then what I said is, okay, well, if there's something to this, like why do we see all tour players kind of getting, into this position where there's shaft lean? There must be something there. So I can go in and do like micro errors to the timing of the muscular coordination. So like let's say we're starting the downswing and the obliques turn on 0.1045 seconds of the downswing. Well, let's add a millisecond to that, so they turn on a little bit later. So these micro errors in the coordination are exactly what we experience. You go to make your backswing and you don't quite finish the backswing because you start pushing on the ground too soon, and okay, whatever. Or maybe the wrist muscle kicks in a little bit early, and this is what it is, right? So I can take the same magnitude of errors, so screw up every swing just a little bit, right?
It's like a nightmare.
It's a nightmare, and take thousands and thousands of swings with these little screw ups and the same magnitudes of screw ups to both golf swings, right? And then make them swing thousands of times. And the outcomes were better with I don't have all the numbers, it was, 6 or 7 years ago, but the outcomes were clearly better. The outcome variability was reduced with the John Rahm shaft lean style swing. And, unfortunately, a million other things happened in my life, and I never really. It's quite a complex, chaotic system.
It sounds
So
like it.
when you have, it could be done because it's still deterministic. It's just chaotic because there's a million factors that all interact. But you could go down and actually try to mechanistically figure out, well, what's leading to this. And, I'll give an analogy of where my brain's currently sitting at is if you guys were going to race down the hallway of a hotel room, okay, and you've got your bags loaded onto a bellhop cart. Would you want to push the bellhop cart or would you want to pull the bellhop cart?
Pull.
You'd want to pull, right? If John's pushing, he's slamming into the hallway, going down, banging into doors and everything. If Adam's pulling, right, it's like a self-correcting mechanism. If the center mass of the cart swings out to the left, based on the direction you're pulling, that's going to create a torque that's going to pull it back. If John's pushing, the center mass of the cart gets kind of out of line with his pull, and he doesn't really notice it, that's going to exaggerate. That's going to create an even bigger torque, and it's going to be tough for him to self-correct. So flipping is kind of like, in my mind, it might be an oversimplified analogy, but that's, or early release. Now you're pushing something, and pushing something produces more variability than pulling something.
Another thing that I've been very interested in terms of shaft lean. By the way, did your model just look at face to path variation, or did it also have ground contact information in?
Speed, so there was no, I didn't look at ground contact, but it would have been increased variability in ground contact because I looked at impact spot on the face, toe, heel, high, low, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, another thing I've kind of seen is that if you say you have negative 10 degrees shaft lean, so the shaft is leaning back, flipping, and then you have a pro 10 degrees of forward shaft lean. For every 10 degrees, it raises where the ball contacts on the face by about 1 groove, which doesn't sound like much, but that can be 2 inches of ground contact difference. So imagine if the goal is to hit the third groove. Well, if a pro is leaning the shaft forwards, they can actually have the sole of the club higher from the ground than the person who's leaning it backwards. It's kind of like a wedge versus a 7-iron. It's almost like you're guaranteed that you have to hit the ground early with a wedge, as the ping study shows, versus 7-iron is the opposite. So to summarize that, I figured out that with 10 degrees of forward shaft lean, it almost opens up an inch extra margin for error in ground contact. So say, for example, those two players drop accidentally in arc depth, they drop the system a groove lower. The one with forward shaft lean is going to get much better outcomes from that, more consistent ball speeds, ground contact, things like that. So I'm super interested in the whole margins for error thing. Like you said, there's looking at it from a one swing perspective, but then there's looking at it from over 100 swings with little perturbations in the movements. What happens?
Yeah, that's the way I like to view golf as well. It's always about probability, and if I did this 100 times versus if I did this 100 times, what is the best average outcome? And the one with the best average outcome is the one I should be trying to do all the time.
You mentioned something about in the model, like a certain muscle activating or deactivating, and then having a consequence in the impact interval. How many different, like, let's just show how difficult the golf swing is. How many different muscles can you like screw up like your golf swing with a transition or whatever? Like it's a pectoral, abdominal, like oblique, like your quad fire, like what is it that the best players are just coordinating all these really well, and everyone else is just totally using the wrong muscles at the wrong time?
Yeah, and that's a skill that is unbelievably challenging. That's at the heart of it. Where it's like I think you telling us, everybody, okay, we could maybe sprint as fast as Usain Bolt. It's the same as saying we can get our face to path variability down to where Scotty Scheffler's is with a 4-iron. It's unrealistic, but there are ways that we can all learn to sprint faster. And I think there's all ways that we can, learn to have better face to path variability. I think that by far technique helps a little bit, but I think if you're choosing a technique for Adam's reasons, which I believe is helpful to increase your margin of errors with, improve low point, right? That's helpful. If you're working on getting the center of mass below the net force vector, I realize that's a whole other show. That's helpful, but really practice, preaching Adam's gospel here. But that's, I've kids that like to golf, and that's let's get some reps in. Like the number of times that I'm like, okay, you can hit 107 irons at 75%, right? And all we're working on is, you got some good sequencing and stuff. I don't need these 7-irons going 170 yards. Let's just have them go 150 yards. You could do that for 2 hours. If you got a hike, someone who's swinging driver at 120, right? But let's just get used to starting these things straight, or having a very repeatable face to path variability, good contact. If you're trying to do that at full speed with a 7-iron all the time, that's going to wear you out. It's going to be tough to get that practice in. But let's just, slow the speed down. Let's see if we can practice that skill. And I know, Adam, you've got tons of other ways of doing this, but to me, that's like at the heart of it, is that you need reps at trying to do that. And for sure, I like your stuff of like, let's hit a hook, let's hit a fade, let's hit off the toe, let's hit off the heel. But fundamentally, repetitions where you're practicing trying to control the face is probably for most people the best way to do it than to try and grind on a technique.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, in the book, I wrote about 3 different forms of consistency. One of them was mechanical consistency, which I would lump the shaft lean thing into that. If you got more shaft lean, you can get away with more errors. Then there's more the skill and coordination side of it, which I dedicated most of my life to developing the drills for that, which is like hitting different parts of the face, just learning how to control from a skill perspective and a coordination perspective. And then you have the third part, which is talent, which is unteachable. That's a genetic component of it. Not everybody's upper end is going to be Usain Bolt, but at least through skill, exercise, and technique, we can move people towards that. So my question is, what percentage would you assign then? Because everybody's always looking for, what's that mechanical secret in my swing that's going to make me hit it like a tour pro? What percentages would you assign to these things of, I suppose, say we take a talent out of the equation, but if you're working with a player, are you working more on the skill sides or the technique side, the mechanic side with people? What are you advising people to do more?
Yeah, I think it would correlate very strongly with handicap. If you're a 30 handicap, we need to get some better concepts and some better technique. If you are a mini tour player, you need to practice better. That's all I tell. You've got to practice, but you got to practice better. You got to practice better. You're not practicing. Are you tracking stuff? Do you know how much you're improving this in practice? You don't, then you're just out in the range, pissing in the wind. That's what infuriates me. But the high handicapper, probably five and up. I shouldn't call five handicaps, but
That's a low handicap
yeah, no, sorry, but like I'm making a
compared to a
lot.
tour
We're gonna
player.
get so many emails now from
Yeah.
15 handicap.
But like here's a love of my poor kids. They're just case study after case study. Because these are the questions that I think about all the time. I've got lots of anecdotes about my kids. So my 14-year-old now, Pierce, looking at his swing when he was 9, I wish we could show it. It was amazing. Looked like Ben Hogan's, fantastic, but didn't hit many balls. So his technique was phenomenal. When he was 9 years old, he 83 miles an hour club head speed with like this little mini driver thing. But he'd shoot like 110, which is fine. He's 9 and I would rarely hit a lot of balls. My current 9-year-old, when I look at their swings, age comparison, Pierce's swing, phenomenal. Marco's current swing, not great technique wise. It's okay. And he swings a driver. He's 9. He swings it at like 74, which is still pretty good, but not where Pierce was. Marco's going to be shooting around par compared to Pierce. Pierce was shooting like 100. But Marco's also hit 1,000,000 golf balls. His hand-eye coordination is phenomenal. So we're looking at, pitching and chipping, and it was really tough to convince him to use better technique. So he would have all his weight in his back foot, and we've got this very friendly apron at our practice green. This is when he was 7 and 8, and he would have a positive angle of attack and pick these things. Not very much spin, but relative to all the other 7 and 8-year-olds, and me even, if we're having like a chipping contest, he's still able to hit these rock range balls and do pretty good, right? But then, you're like, all right, I would force him into tougher situations to look at that technique, the mechanical aspect that you're talking about, right? Where if you don't have any shaft lean, you can put someone in a situation where it's going to get really, really hard, right? Right. So there's an example where, okay, he's going to quickly, no matter how much he practices, he's going to hit a block. If we always played on super tight lies, if everything was off concrete, yeah, great. He could hand-eye coordinate his way out of any situation. He'd be in a bunker. But you put him down in the rough, now we're done. You can't be, you can't go through 6 inches of grass and expect to figure out what's going on with the golf ball. So there's anyway lots of anecdotes looking at my kids trying to figure out exactly what you're saying. What is the percentage of importance, and what should you focus on?
Yeah. So, I mean, with margins for error, so we've looked at kind of two things there. Where the low point is matters. If your low point is behind, any up or down errors that you make are going to have a bigger effect on ground contact. There's going to be a bigger variance there. And then shaft lean as well. Shaft lean can open up the ability to raise and lower and still achieve consistent results. I'm pushing towards things like flat spots here, again, seeing and even rate of closure. I know we've discussed it in the past, because those, again, from a geometry point of view, make perfect sense, right? What are your thoughts at the moment on those things, and any evidence for those things being there? For I suppose we should give a brief explanation for people what flat spots are and rate of closure, and I'll let you do that.
Yeah, so the idea of a flat spot is that you can create movements with the handle and the grip of the club that could pair with the rotation of the club that can actually have the club head move straight. You've probably done this a million times, but there's my water bottle. There's my water bottle that's on an arc. But if, as this water bottle is going down, if I move my hand up, we could have it, I can go through a lot of rotation. But if I move my hand up, then the water bottle can take like the head of it can go really flat, And then the idea being that, if I've got this super flat spot, then errors in ball position, for example, aren't going to matter. Oh, I put the ball too far up my stance or too far back in my stance. Well, it doesn't matter. the club's traveling along this, flat arc. And it's, Chris Como would say, well, it's not just flat relative to the ground, it's a 3D flat spot. So it could be a really long flat spot that's tilted at an angle to the ground. You could still be very steep and have a long flat spot. And there's just, there's not a ton there, if you're like, it's not, there's nothing really, at least from full swing stuff, that jumps out and says like, yeah, these players have flatter spots and they, they're playing better. Yeah, it's just tough. And then rate of closure is kind of the same. There's just, but I fundamentally believe that, yeah, maybe it'll help a little bit, but just, there's still no real solid evidence to suggest that reducing your rate of closure, the rate at which the face angle is changing relative to the target line through impact, if you slow that down or have it changing, at a lower rate, that you'll be more repeatable. And I talked about the last time in this podcast, I believe, where if you have someone hitting a 30-foot putt, that they know the break and everything, like, all right, hit 10 30-foot putts, and I get to measure their face to path variability, it's going to be about the same as their driver trying to hit a full drive, so it's like you got a rate of closure of like potentially 0 with the putter. Some people even actually open the face, and the driver, it's going to be in the thousands, and yet our ability to control the face, yeah, about the same relative to the path. That answers a lot of questions. It's throws cold water on a lot of.
I've actually got an reverse flat spot theory at the moment, which is
okay.
Again, it was just me going through the kind of the math, the physics, knowing how, when the face is open X amount, how far the ball goes offline. So, I was thinking of a curved path, non-flat spot. So imagine the path is changing 2 degrees every inch. And imagine the face is also closing 2 degrees every inch. So if you were hitting 180 yards with a 7-iron, you'd have a 6-yard left to 6-yard right dispersion if there were 3 shots placed at different intervals there. 1 an inch back, 1 on 0, 1 an inch forwards. That would be a 6-yard right to left dispersion. Sorry, 12 yards right to left total. Now, if you had the same amount of face closure, 2 degrees open an inch before, square, 2 degrees closed an inch after, but you flattened that path, so the path was 0 through that entire interval. Now, if you have a ball back, center, and forwards, you get actually almost double the dispersion, 11 left to right. So it's an interesting one. I need to do more mental modeling on it.
Well, and the range of how much you can change that flat spot, or what we see in reality, is like the radius changes by, a few inches from player to player. It's kind of just, for a driver, it's with a putter, it can be to the moon, but with a driver, it's not like somebody's radius of curvature is, in the middle of the shaft and someone's above their head. They're all, by the time you get to impact, they're all within, the radiuses are very similar. If you went in your extreme example, which I like, then you go, okay, well, can we do this? And it's like, well, we may not even have the ability to even do it, but it's a good thought, right? It's like, yeah, I think you need those thought experiments.
So anybody who's trying to get this mechanical advantage or these better shots through reducing the amount the face closes, adding flat spots potentially, they're probably looking in the wrong areas, maybe, you think?
Yeah.
Maybe even introducing more inconsistency, because as you start to try and think about certain mechanical things, you're then introducing more inconsistency through coordination disruptions, potentially.
Yeah. I think if you have systematic issues, then it's definitely worthwhile looking at mechanics.
Yeah, if you're hitting everything off the shank, then yeah, let's
right?
fix it.
Yep. If you're just looking at general face to path variability, odds are that probably let's go down the road of a better practice methodology. That's the way I lean.
Me too.
Yeah.
Can we talk about, I think you have some really interesting thoughts on the potential or the proposed ball rollback. And
Yeah.
I want people to hear your thoughts. I mean, I think the rollback could benefit you and the stack, obviously, because you guys
Let's
are
do it.
focusing on increasing
Roll it
swing
back.
speed. But talk about why you think it's a you've been public that you think they're not fixing the problem, and it's not going to make the change that they think it will.
Yeah, first of all, they won't even define the problem, but you can.
Well, I think, from a layman's perspective, you see the reports. It's like, oh, club head speed keeps increasing, and we can't play the same golf courses anymore. Therefore, we need to roll it back to preserve the game. I think that's
Right,
in a nutshell
right.
what it is.
And then even I think it was Mike Wan said, "Hey, look, even if we do roll it back, we still won't be able to play these courses." But let's assume
Well, that's a whole separate discussion, because I think
Totally.
there's some people like, I would love to play this country club that's historic, and like I've gone to some places, like I'll give you an example. Inverness in Ohio would be a wonderful US Open venue. It's plenty long, it's plenty hard. They can't have it there just because of the facilities. There's nowhere to stay. Like there's other elements to hosting golf,
Yeah,
big golf
yeah.
tournaments,
But let's
and
assume
membership too.
that's the theory, that and it's got to be at the elite level,
Mhm.
because Arcos has their nice report where it's like, hey, look, driving distance over the last 5 years, and it's like
It's going
flat,
nowhere. Yeah, it's like,
right?
yeah.
My course from the blue tees, I'm great. I play golf a lot, and we've got a 6,100 yards from the blue tees. Nobody plays the black tees. It's we're at sea level. It's cold. The fairways don't roll up very much. It's plays really long at 6,100 yards. No one's moving back to black, right? So we're like, and the blacks are like 6,400 or something. So this is an elite problem, so we can focus on that. I think, is that fair? It's like the tour players are doing something we
Yeah,
don't like.
my belief is that, I know it's more complicated than this, but I was just, I'm trying to help average golfers, and there's not a distance problem with average
Right.
golfers. There
Right.
just isn't.
So if we say that, yeah, it's something we're trying to address at the elite level, then I believe they are using current data to make predictions that are inappropriate. They have some false premises. So here's how it would go if I was the USGA or the R&A. They go, okay, let's look at how much clubhead speed has been increasing over the last 10 years. And it's like, half mile per hour. Okay, like 10 years we've gone up 4 miles per hour, let's say. Okay, well, probably we're going to hit this asymptote somewhere around 120. That's what the average is going to be. And therefore, if we slow the ball down so that if you swing at 120, we'll go back to what the driving distances were in 2015, and that's great, and everything will reach homeostasis. That's like, pull your head out of the sand. 120 isn't fast, right? 160 is a fast clubhead speed. They fundamentally believe that clubhead speed is currently limited based on the players and things that the players can do, but it's not. Clubhead speeds, the average on tour, is limited because players are trying to maximize strokes gained for the course setups. So if they swing faster, the ball will go further into existing trouble. TPC Sawgrass is a perfect example of this, where you'll see Schauffele hitting a hybrid, Brian Harman hitting a driver, and the ball goes the same place. Very few golfers currently that can swing at 130 and maximize their strokes gained. Bryson's one of them. Rory kind of gets there, but some of the other guys that can swing that fast just choose not to. Tony Finau, yeah, no problem. He could swing 130 all day. I could list players. So if you slow the ball down, let's say you could slow it down by 5 miles per hour. So that what they're proposing. So let's say that a 125 clubhead speed produces the same carry distance tomorrow as 120 does today. You will instantaneously see a whole bunch of guys overnight add 5 miles an hour, right? And it will be the guys like Tony Finau will instantaneously, boom, Xander Schauffele, boom. And then you'll see guys like Brian Harman no longer be able to compete. And there's enough players who can play elite level golf and swing at 125, 130, 135, 140 miles an hour. By slowing the ball down, you put more of an emphasis on driving. On hole 18, TPC Sawgrass, you're going to have everybody now hitting driver because their dispersions are going to get tighter at those distances, right? If you went out and played with a squash ball, no one would miss a fairway, right? If the ball only went 100 yards, you'd have everybody be swinging at 100 as fast as they could. So that's what they're fundamentally misunderstanding. That the clubhead speeds are not limited by the players currently. They're limited by players trying to maximize strokes gained. And there are very few players right now who are straight enough to maximize strokes gained at 185 plus ball speeds, right? I'm not straight. If you gave me 185 ball speed, my strokes gained would go down.
Well, there's like a level of diminishing returns is essentially what you're saying, because yeah, if you look at like the premier events on the PGA Tour, like Bay Hill, Memorial, TPC Sawgrass, obviously some of the majors, like it does put a premium on hitting fairways on those courses. And if you have big misses, like you can't play professional golf. Like that's what blows me away by like the best drivers is like, yes, they hit it far, but they also hit it they keep it in play. Incredible, like, and all you have to do is play. I was actually in a match in a tournament recently with someone who had 120-mile-per-hour club head speed. And when they connected, great, but when they missed it, like, whoa, like way offline. Like it's tremendous. So like I look at, the fastest players and I'm like, incredible face control at those speeds is what
Bryson's
so
driving performance at the PGA Championship was absolutely
it's
unbelievable. So, you slow the ball down. That means, let's say they hit the same club, the same driver, their dispersion automatically decreases, right? Because it's coming, the cone, it's down in this more narrow part of the cone, right? Then they go, okay, now I'm no longer optimizing for strokes gained. I'm going to start swinging faster to hit it further. And then everybody ends up back around the same places where the ball goes.
What if you, I know one of the proposed things was to increase the spin rates of the ball, which that would kill me because I'm such a slow swinger. I launch the ball 17 with 2,000 spin. That's the only way I can get it out there. And so if you increase the spin, you'd hurt me a lot.
Legal or illegal, it's like, okay, and so it has to be well-defined parameters, but it's it's one measurement. You're not saying, okay, we need you to test this ball at 80 miles an hour, 85 miles an hour, and at each of these things, it has to meet these conditions. It's like, no, we're going to whack it at 125, and then we see what happens. Well, Titleist goes, right, we're going to change. So if they somehow make it enforce spinnier, then they need a test to test the spin, and then Titleist can go, all right, we're going to hit this number for this one test, but then we're going to change the aerodynamics and we're going to change the moment of inertia, or we'll have 2 or 3 balls that exactly hit these specs for this test, but then this ball is optimized for the 100-mile-an-hour player and this ball is optimized for the 140-mile-an-hour player, even though they all at this testing meet the specifications, but then they have different properties to do different things for everybody else. Like I wouldn't be surprised if Titleist goes, yeah, great. They could almost like say, right, we've met your specs, and now we've made this awesome ball that's even more separates. Slow players get left even further behind, and fast players benefit even more. They actually exaggerate it. Right? That it's just, I personally think if you want to control the issue, if they approached it scientifically, right, that you go in there and you'd say, right, where are the courses that are too short? And then you go in and say, where are the holes that that the players are playing in ways we don't like them to play, right? And then you go, what could we do to the design of this hole that's least intrusive and fix it? Like, let's say Bay Hill. Oh, we don't want people driving the par 5, number 6, right? They don't want going across the water. You could put a 20-foot maple tree just off to the left of the tee box. It would be in no one's line of sight. No one would even notice it. But the guy that's trying to cut the corner is like, I can't go through that maple tree. But it does nothing to the playability of the course. It's not even in your line of sight. Next time you guys go and play golf, you realize that. You're like, oh, there's a tree right there, 20 feet off the tee box. Doesn't do anything to me. It doesn't change the course. Any of these elite courses could stick a tree in the ground, overnight. You look at what courses in the open route do, where they put the pop bunkers in around, 300, 320. Now you start thinking, shoot, there's a stroke if I end up in this. But I also fundamentally have no problem if you put all these features in play and someone can drive it 340 down the middle in a 20-yard fairway, you deserve to win the tournament. That is an amazing skill. If you can say, I am this good, like, not far off what Bryson was doing at the PGA Championship, then that's how it works. Go out and shoot 60 every round. Awesome. You know, like if someone starts running 9.4 in the 100 meters, we don't go, wow, God, let's, make them run in cement shoes. I'll be worried when someone starts shooting like 25 for 18 holes. Like every second hole they're getting an ace. Now we're like, okay, now what are we going to do? We won't be able to separate the good golfers from the bad golfers, but we've got so much room there. We're still only 50% putting from 8 feet. I just don't, you know,
Yeah, I mean, I think from what I agree with your stance in the sense that like I don't think it'll materially change the outcome of tour events. I think the same guys will still be on the top and might favor the longer hitters even more. I guess the opposite argument is that the governing bodies feel like we need to do something to either freeze this or make it go backwards because we can't keep lengthening golf courses for these tournaments, and it becomes like the cost issue of it, which again I'm not privy to,
but
that's not my expertise, so I'm not sure about that.
right. But if that's the argument, like their guys are just going to start swinging at 130. Balls will
Yeah,
still be
well,
landing in the same place.
yeah, my feeling is like no one's going to get what they want. Like it'll happen and courses won't materially change that much and the leaderboards won't look that different. It'll be like that wasn't like that big of an extreme outcome because they're not rolling it back that much, it sounds like.
If they rolled it back so that, guys lost 50 yards,
Yeah,
that,
like a big change. Yeah, yes.
then it would do it. We could, if you'd
Yes.
have to set it where you'd set the test at 140. If at 140 mile per hour club head speed, the ball went 300 yards, that would do it. It would probably be good for 50 years, because then it becomes very difficult to get that set of I can swing over 140 and I can putt, it's a different athlete, right? But there's so much room between 160 and 120 they don't realize how easy it is for athletes to get in there and fill that gap. It's not like baseball. Everybody knows guys at their club that can swing at high 120s. You guys probably, they're everywhere, right?
We don't have any, for the record, at our club.
Come on, sure you do.
I'm at like actually maybe we got a guy who's probably like 116, 117. No 120s freaks.
What? You got
No,
to
no.
get out. Adam,
And
talk to me.
We're a good playing club. No, I mean, and when I play in tournaments, I come across college kids and stuff like that who can move it for sure.
Yeah.
You athlete.
Right. But if you look at baseball, right, if you look at the elite baseball pitchers that are throwing at 100 miles an hour, there's no one around throwing at 120. Do you know what I mean?
No.
Like
I think there's a guy in the Mets farm system who could throw at 104 right now. I think is the most I've seen.
so that's what I'm saying. The elite, the average guy playing pickup baseball is not throwing a baseball 100 miles an hour.
Yeah,
They're
tapped out. Yeah.
Right. There are tons of golfers out there swinging at, PGA Tour average. Do you know what I mean? So that they're like, take the blinders off and realize that we're only talking about the elite golfers in the world, 200 or 300 players. Hey, you slow the ball down. All of a sudden, we're just going to say, right now, it's going to be 130 to play at this level, and we're not saving any courses. It's so plain to me to see that happening. We'll just have to go through this exercise again, in 5 years when it doesn't work.
Yeah, I feel like if they were really going to do it, it had to be much, much, much bigger. Like it doesn't seem like it's enough to materially change the golf course thing and or the outcome of tournaments because as you said, like guys can add 5-8 miles an hour if they want.
Right. And what it's going to do though, they want, a lot of people say, well, I like the shot shaping. You want to see shot shaping? Heat the ball up. Like, let's get that thing rocketing. Let's get, now you're going to force to see shot shaping. Right? People are going to have to, if this thing was like super hot, you'd have to otherwise you would just hit it at a play. That's where you'd see some really cool stuff. You slow it down and we're just going to see people just bang it. That's what's going to happen. And there's going to be no more Brian Harmons. Even a guy like someone like Matt Fitzpatrick, who's trained, he had the longest drive, number 2 on Sunday, the PGA Championship, 184 ball speed. But we're getting to his limit. He's not going to be able to train to get up to 190 ball speed. So he's going to be in trouble. Brian Harmons, there's going to be so many. Russell Henley. Russell who? He's gone, right?
Russell Henley.
Yeah, right. That's which I don't like. To me, that's unfortunate. Where it's just it's just going to be guys that can generate 130 club head speed. That's no good.
Well, I still think to play professional golf, you need like an incredibly well-rounded game. It was a good example. Cam, oh god, he came out he's won a couple of times, but he's pretty much like losing his tour card. He swings in the 120s. Oh my god, why am I forgetting his last name?
Cam Champ.
Cam Champ. So everyone was like freaked out when he first came on the tour. They're like, "This is it. This is the end. This guy can swing 128, 130, no problem." He won a couple of times. He's losing his tour card. He's still like top 5 strokes gained off the tee, but his short game is abysmal. And I think his iron play is pretty bad too compared to tour players. And he can't keep his card right now, which is interesting to me because it shows you like, yeah, you do need to hit it far and straight, but like you also need to do a lot of other stuff incredibly. Like you look at Xander's game, Bryson's short game is like literally off the planet right now. So good.
Yep, yep. But he can't. For Cameron Champ, the rollback can't come fast enough.
Yeah, I'm sure it could give him a little advantage
Like, can
again,
you think
maybe.
of anybody like if we went out and played, we consider 110 a fast club head speed. You'd be like in your group, you're like, oh yeah, that's pretty fast for a group of
Yeah,
amateurs.
yeah.
Can you
That
think of anybody on tour who swings it at 110?
not anymore.
Nope. And if we roll the ball back, that's going to go to 115. You just won't be able to. That's all we're saying is that now 115 becomes the bottom.
I guess it's like tiger proofing the Masters just gave him more of an advantage there. Maybe. My guess is it's going to be like a bit of a nothing burger.
Yeah.
That's my prediction. It's not going to materially change the golf courses or the outcomes of tournaments that much.
Nope. It'll raise the average club head speed. You'll see guys that are currently playing that can get in there with like 113, 114. They won't be around anymore, but that'll be about it.
Can you just raise
Nice.
the rough up farther? We talked about this
That's
a little bit. My triangulating the rough in a little bit more so it gets narrow as you go farther down there. So it's more of a risk reward. People can take it on if they want.
right. You could. I personally think that's the way I would like to do it. Like take a U.S. Open and you pick a distance from the hole where you go. Let's say it's 200 yards, and you have the rough be light enough so that if you miss the fairway, yeah, you can get a 5-iron there. It's gonna be tough, but you don't have to hack it out. But if you're 150 and in, like let's have them go along and have the blade, the mowers decks raise up as you go. So if, all of a sudden you get to 100 yards out and you need the 4 caddy to find the ball. But if you can hit the fairway, at 350 down the middle, good on you. Go win the tournament. But there's also an option for the guy who's, going to play a little bit more conservatively. And let's see if, great, you can stick your 5-iron out of the rough from, 210. Go ahead and do it. That would be interesting. Missing the fairway at 270 and you're still hacking out. Everybody's hacking out. That's what I would like to see. I would like to see you can go in and look at the holes. This is what the USG hasn't done. Let's look at the holes where the average club head speed is like 112, right? You go, okay, well, why is that? What is it about the way this hole is designed that doesn't, have people bombing it? And then you go and look at a par 4 that's like the average club head speed's 118. Okay, well, these are the types of holes we need to fix. What could we change about this hole?
Just squeeze the trouble as they get further down. Like that's, I mean, look at, what Scott Fawcett's done with Decade. Like they analyze a hole and they're like, the highest expected score is like when you go up to these pinched bunkers and like you can lay back 20 yards and then you'd have a 9-iron in your hand, maybe not a pitching wedge, but you're safer.
Like it.
I mean, as a casual PGA Tour or pro golf fan, I actually think I'd kind of take the opposite side. I actually think there's a nice mixture of golf courses on the tour. I
Yeah.
think there's some events where it's a foot race and, players can get to 20, 25 under, but then there's, Memorial this last weekend, I think was 8 or 9. I know people focus on par so much, but I think there's a really nice mixture of like really difficult, challenging courses. And then some like not as popular events where they're just blowing the daylights out of it. And you could watch these guys just do some incredible stuff with their driver and irons.
I have,
My view is just like the sky is not falling and some people like are sounding alarm bells. I'm like, I just don't feel a sense of panic, but
Panic about the rollback coming, or a panic to do anything
Or
about
a
it?
panic that the game is like totally a disaster, and if it continues on this path, like golf will be like a total disaster in 10 years. Like I just don't see that. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
No, 100%. I don't see that at all. Not, I've got no problem with. We're talking about, a very elite, small percentage of golf. I mean, if they can go out and build a, how much did the stadium for the TGL cost? I don't know. Was it like $100 million? I'm pulling stuff numbers out of my butt.
Probably in the tens of millions would be my guess.
Right. And, so it's like, okay, build a couple of golf courses the way you want for your league. I know there's some nostalgia there, and it's like, but we'd have to roll to make St. Andrews play the way it's supposed to play. We'd have to roll the ball back 50 yards, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, also like, to some extent those courses, it's the weather.
Yeah.
You could
Yeah.
roll it back, but if it's blowing, I don't know when the next time the Open's at St. Andrews, but if it's blowing 30 that week, all week, like yeah, the scores will be higher. If it's not blowing, then that's what those courses are about, the weather.
Here's the other thing, the USG, if you want to do this scientifically, go get a bunch of elite college players, give them a ball. Pay Titleist to make you the ball that conforms, and then say, all right, college kids, we're going to pay you some cash over the summer, and we're just going to play with this ball. Let's see what happens, right? Have you play one round with the current ball, one round with the non-current ball, and let's see what they decide to do. And then you actually have some data, as opposed to, it bothers me when you don't really have a financial stake. Like, the golf industry's got big business. You got Titleist, you got lots of companies that have done well with patents and they've got a foothold. And then somebody comes in that has no financial, and they're like, oh yeah, we're changing the rules. If somebody came in and told like Heinz ketchup, hey guys, you can't use vinegar in the ketchup anymore. Sorry. Be like, who's that? You said what now?
It really
You're like,
does
what?
suck for the ball manufacturers that they got singled out, because they didn't go to like, I know Titleist makes drivers as well, and Callaway, they both make balls and drivers. But what they said, I'm like, all right, you got to roll your driver back now too. Like it creates like a singular burden on one style of manufacturing to solve the problem for perceived problem for everyone, and they have to bear the brunt of the R&D. Maybe, I don't know how are they being compensated for it? I don't know. By who?
I don't think we're too far away from a world where the USGA and the R&A can make themselves irrelevant. If they push too much, right?
Yeah, the PGA Tour will be like, we'll just play our own rules.
Like every other sport,
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I could see the NCAA doing it first, being like, we're gonna, there's so many rules that are just, let's not get started on the rules, but bang my head against the table, right? It's like, and if you start making crazy demands and, this is the way it has to be, and it's like, why do you get to dictate to everybody in the golf industry what has to happen? If this is an epic failure and Titleist loses market share because, Vice finds the sweet spot and happens to, here's the best ball, that to me, that is crazy. I'm sure Titleist is going to be okay, but like that, a major disruptor is like.
But at the recreational level, like they're talking about rolling the ball back for everyone. So I could see non-conforming golf balls, because you'll have people who say like, hey, I don't want to lose 10 yards off the tee. And then Vice or any other one could just be like, hey, we're doing a non-conforming ball, like the same one you had now, like prior to this. We're still going to sell it. And then you might have handicap matches where golfers, one's playing a non-conforming ball and a conforming ball, like amateur tournaments. Like it does, like when I think about it, like long term, I'm like, this could create a lot of unintended like can of worms that I'm not so sure will be for the greater good. I don't know. I can't predict the future, but that's what I foresee is normal golfers being like, hey, or people like who trained with the stack being like, I worked hard for that extra 15 yards. And you're gonna like take it back from me, and like, hell no, I'm gonna keep playing this other ball if someone makes it.
It will be very interesting. No one really bought in with was a Callaway's ERC driver that had the .86 face. Maybe that was before your time. You guys remember that driver?
One, yeah.
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah, but like Callaway kind of gambled on saying like, oh, average golfer doesn't play competitive golf. Everybody's going to buy this, but they didn't. Golf's traditional sports, but if I was the USG and R&A, I wouldn't be. You've got the United States Open, you've got some amateur events. Other than that, people hate the rules. Like you may irritate people and enough people in the golf industry into irrelevancy. Like I'm sure Ping, if you ask, Carson Solheim, how does he feel about the groove issue? To me, that's a perfect example of someone who's worked hard, grinded, come up with a solution to a problem. Golfers are loving it, and then somebody comes along and says, "Yeah, no, this iron line you got that's selling really well, and these grooves are really good. We don't have any science on it, really, but yeah, we're gonna make it so you can't sell those anymore." Like, what industry? Like, how? We're not talking about a government organization. We're talking about safety. We're talking about some peripheral organization dictating massive financial decisions for the whole industry is kind of wild. Just on
It's
faith.
different. It's
Trust us.
different
We're
when you
the
take.
leaders. We
Yeah, yeah.
run the show. Who gave you the power?
Yeah, I guess that's a good question. Yeah, it is. It just is that way, right?
Yeah.
Huh.
You get. There's a lot of NCAA could do it. Live Golf could definitely do it. Live Golf be like, yeah, these rules, no bueno. We're coming up with our own rules, and then you get enough people using different rules, and then it's like, all right, everything. There's just chaos. People are like, screw it. Who needs the USG and RNA?
We'll see what happens when it eventually does happen. Before we let you go, give us an update. I know the Stack has some new features. Want you to promote your product. I know you guys have worked really hard on that. I saw the wedge at the PJ show. I saw the new wedge features. So what are you guys working on?
Yeah, we've got. I'm really pumped about it. With speed training, we've added in scheduling. You guys familiar with like the book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow?
Yes, I have it, but I haven't read it because I'm too lazy. But it's in my house.
Okay, and then there's a concept in there about implementation intentions. Also made very popular with Atomic Habits, about habit
That I'm a
stacking.
big fan of.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, I love habit stacking.
Yeah, so we've got when you go to schedule your next stack session, we show the 100% grit window, you pick the date and the time, but then you say where you're going to stack. And we've got this
Hmm.
really interesting little interface for you. I'm going to stack in the garage, and then we got this thing that says habit stacking. I'm going to stack after my morning coffee. I'm going to stack after my rain session. I'm going to stack before, I go to the gym. So I was pretty excited about that. And then we've got wedging, which has caught fire, where we've created these little combines. Stack Radar pairs with the Stack app to run you through these distance control combines. That's been super fun. And then putting, we keep kind of adding some layers to putting. Just it's a fun way to practice. I feel like it's the most effective way to practice your putting if you've only got 15 minutes, and we give some really solid insights. Yeah, I'm not sure
Nice.
what we're gonna do next. Lots of stuff.
I'm sure you've got some
I
ideas.
do. I got.
All right. Well, yeah.
I don't know if I apologize. I don't know if we did the ground reaction for justice. I apologize because I feel like I could have just waved my hands and said a bunch of stuff, but it's important, but maybe not important the way that a lot of people are saying that it's important,
Well, I
right?
think that's an interesting takeaway. Is like you're a diagnostician, a researcher, and you're looking at these things. But is there value for a golfer to like? We know they're important, but as you said, like Tiger says, I've literally never thought about my lower half of my body. It's not an important intention to him, but for some players, it might be a low hanging fruit on something they're doing wrong in their iron swing or driver, or again, training with a stack or doing some exercises to self organize to use the ground more effectively without technically thinking about it.
If there's a golfer out there who's going to go work with someone with force plates, the first thing they should ask them is, "Hey, how much? What's my level of angular momentum like relative to my club head speed?" And if the person is like, well, let's look at the sequencing of your horizontal and vertical, it'd be like, no, that's not the question I asked. I want
Yeah,
you to
yeah.
know how much angular momentum do I have in my system, and is my club head speed high relative to that number? And then you'd say, well, why do you want me to change what I'm doing with the ground? Maybe I've got plenty of angular momentum. Maybe I've got too much. And if you have too much, that's when it could potentially lead to an injury. If you try to add more, because in particular with side bend, if you add more frontal plane angular momentum and you can't get that out to the club, all you're doing is crazy side bending instead. So
Hmm.
anyway,
Well, where can everyone find? I know you've got a ton of research out there. Where can everyone find, your research, the stack stuff?
X is a
Where can
good
everyone
place.
see all
Scroll
this?
through my feed on X,
Yeah, yeah.
and I post lots of stuff on there. Skip through the stack stuff, and every once in a while I've got some cool studies posted. And I got some stuff on Vimeo. I got content
Just
all over the place.
Google Sasha MacKenzie golf, and you'll see a million things.
Yeah, yeah. Drink a coffee before
Yeah,
Googling.
I did love your when the longer drive shaft stuff came out. I loved all of your videos on that. They were very cool. So yeah, Sasha's got a great library of stuff. I think that one was on Vimeo. Adam, where can everyone find your stuff?
AdamYoungGolf.com. John, where can people find your stuff?
Go to my YouTube page now, John Sherman Golf. Thanks for everyone for listening, your feedback, your comments, and we'll see you next time with a new episode.
Thanks, Sasho.